We want to switch gears a little bit here, and with our next panel, we'd like to show you a different perspective with the aviation industry's view from outside the FAA. Please welcome your moderators, NATCA's Director of Safety and Technology, Jim Ullmann, and the President of Human Solutions, Brenda Boone.
Glad you came.
Good morning. Do I date myself if I tell you that I used to work the Aspens at Seattle Center many, many years ago? I think I probably do. First, let me thank Brenda Boone for graciously agreeing to co-moderate this panel with me.
You're welcome.
As we settle in for this panel, which is a relatively short hour, now that Mr. Schul is done, I believe it's important to know how valuable the view from outside the FAA is. Let's make no mistake, the global aviation industry is a multi-billion-dollar operation and is the lifeline which connects the entire world. There are numerous collective entities that meet on a frequent basis that more or less help drive the direction of the NAS. Next Gen Advisory Committee, Drone Advisory Committee, numerous advisory committees, work groups, teams, a lot of them not just FAA people. I just mentioned these are not FAA-only groups. Make no mistake, it isn't as simple as the agency having carte blanche to do whatever they want. I believe these panelists bring a wealth of aviation experience from several different perspectives. I look forward to the dialogue. Brenda.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our panel on the view from the outside looking in. As Jim was saying, our aviation community is changing even faster than the speed of rocket. We're no longer the cozy little community where everyone knows one another and we all know who's calling all the shots and providing direction for the future. We're still the cozy community, we all know that, but we have a much greater influence from the outside world every day. We all know that there will always be passengers that need to fly, and while at the same time we're on this gigantic area of programs that are being planned for implementation, and that will impact everyone in this room. So are we ready? Is the FAA ready? We know that the success of any business is all about the people. I know that from owning a business for 21 years and doing work with air traffic all of those years. We know that it's all about the relationships that happen in this industry. Over the last 5 years, loss of separation has continued to go down. This is one metric that's tracked by the FAA's fact book, and this is one statistic that the controllers have complete control over. These are the people that keep our system safe, and it speaks volumes to their professionalism, to the dedication, and to the skill level of this workforce. The camaraderie and focus on teamwork is what makes it effective, and that is what NATCA is all about. It's a career where many times you see sons and daughters following their fathers into the business. That speaks for the professionalism of the industry. So my look from the outside in is that I believe no matter what we look like in the future, as long as we're in with NATCA, we're in really good hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that. Now let's introduce the panel members. Let's start with Rachel Jackson from Raytheon. We have Kate Hallahan from Hallahan & Associates. Jared Thompson for Airlines for America. Donna McLean from Planzer McLean. Todd Hopte, President and CEO of AAAE. And Dave Holtz, the Senior Vice President of Operations from Delta Airlines. So, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking time with us. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go right into the questions. So back in 2009, almost a decade ago, NATCA's leadership team pointed our organization in a direction which we're still following today. And that is built around being successful collaborative partners, working with all stakeholders, every possible venue in the aviation community to ensure that our workforce will not just have a say in the modernization of the NAS, but to be a measurable asset to access and help drive change. So my question to you is this. Do you believe there's been a change in how NATCA is looked at from within the aviation industry? And is it important that our workforce, which makes up a lot of this audience, understand how many changes that potentially affect their work environment isn't necessarily up to them? So, anybody want to start? Random order.
I can start. I think that when you look at the numbers of committees, both industry and FAA-led working groups that NATCA participates in and leads, NATCA's clearly on the Next Gen Advisory Committee, and all the other very important kind of future-thinking committees and also things that we're dealing with today. I think that's really very positive. And a couple of years ago, Paul was given the Glenn Gilbert Memorial Award, the highest award that the Air Traffic Control Association gives. And then this spring, Trish had an endowed Women in Aviation scholarship named after her. And I think that those are really representative of how industry views and respects not only NATCA as an organization, but Paul and Trish as your leaders.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I was on the Hill as a staffer on the House Transportation Aviation Subcommittee in the early 90s, and when controllers came to me at that time, we were literally talking about, can we wear shorts in the towers and can we have coffees without lids on our consoles? And today the conversation is so far from that, so professional, so talking about how do we solve our industry's problems. It's night and day. And I think that's fantastic and obviously much needed with all the change we're seeing coming in our industry. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I would take it from sort of two perspectives. One, I worked in the Senate for 12 years. 7 of those years was predominantly just on aviation policy. And whether you like it or not, or for better or for worse, Congress has a large impact on your job and what you do every day. But over the course of like the last decade, I noticed it when I was on the Hill and I noticed in industry, you have 3 great things. You have tremendous leadership, you've established bipartisan relationships, and you've done something that is really hard to do on Capitol Hill because of the turnover, is educate people at what you do and the process, what you do behind the scenes. A lot of times, from a congressional perspective, it's Congressman tells FAA do something, doesn't care what happens in the background. There's a much better understanding now of all the work that goes on in the background. So I applaud you for what you've done over the last 10 years. It's been really transformative.
Yeah, first of all, from the airline side, thanks to the front lines and everything you guys have done to run a safe and more efficient system year over year than it ever has before, which we greatly appreciate. I think change is coming quickly, to your question. It's going to come quicker with time in every area, that's true. So as change comes quicker, we've got to make sure that we're linked up. And I think we do a good job today, but we need to do a better job tomorrow of looking at it from a system aspect and making sure that everyone in industry has the same system view of how we can keep things safer, make processes more streamlined, make it simpler for the frontline controllers or the frontline people that are dispatching the aircraft from our shops to work underneath the same system. When times are difficult or busy, is not the time you want to be deviating from your tried and true processes, whether you're on the front line as a controller or in our airline. And I think we're developing processes, technology that better lets you do that. So in the busy times, you don't have to deviate from established process. That's what a safety culture is really all about, and it's got to be integrated between the airlines, obviously, and you in the front line here in the FAA. And I think we're getting closer to that. So the more we take a system view of things going forward, I think that's going to push everybody to a safer culture and a more efficient operation for all of us.
And I just back clean up on this. Say for 21 years, I was the lobbyist for the American Association of Airport Executives. And in my experience, NATCA always had political power by virtue of the fact that there's so many of you all around the country. But NATCA has, in my mind, never had as much political influence as it has today. And that, I really believe, is because of the courageous, visionary leadership that Paul Rinaldi and Trish Gilbert display on a regular basis on behalf of each of you in Washington. We used to fight on things, and we don't always agree on every issue, but I can't think of a time where I've picked up the phone and called and asked for something and had an answer anything other than let's make it work, let's figure it out. So I just want to say thank you for everything that you do. Thank you to Paul and to Trish and the leadership team. The culture has changed, the dynamic has changed so much. I've been around long enough that I remember the good old John Carr days. It's so different today, and so that's why I'm here.
I'm going to do cleanup.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
So I'm also sort of a Hill veteran, worked about 23 years on Capitol Hill, 15 of them on the Appropriations Committee, which is the committee in Congress that funds the FAA. And part of the question is about change that can happen that's going to impact your workforce that you don't have any control over. Well, in about 2 weeks, there's going to be an election, and no matter what happens, whether the House flips or not, there are going to be changes in the Congress. There's going to be a new chairman of the T&I committee. It could be Peter DeFazio, it could be Sam Graves, Jeff Denham, you never know. So there is going to be change that's going to impact policy that will have an impact on you all. Sort of echoing what everyone else said here about don't ever underestimate the role that you all play when you come to Capitol Hill to talk about NATCA's priorities, because those are the things that really help stop the change that you want to stop and make the change that you do want to make.
Thanks for that. And as a reminder, we are using Slido.com, hashtag NATCACFS for questions. We'll keep an eye on it as best we can. Next question. Each of you have had extensive experience in the aviation industry. I think we talked about this dinner last night. We're 200 years cumulatively. Some worked on the Hill, agencies, corporate positions. For your perspective, what's the greatest challenge facing our industry in the next 3 to 5 years?
I'll start since I was it last time.
Okay.
I mean, I think one of the things that's really a great challenge that's in the forefront in the next few years that's really going to impact you all is just the explosion of new entrants into the national airspace system. The whole concept of urban air mobility is really going to challenge the system, but it's also a real opportunity, and you all are really going to be critical in helping the FAA meet that challenge. That's all I have to say.
I guess I look at it at two different levels. There's sort of a macro high level of sort of the bedrock things that you need in place. We need to make sure that terrorism does not impact and aviation is not used in that. The economy, when the economy's good, everything can move forward. And the third one's sort of just cyberspace as a whole across not just this industry, but every industry. But then more to a micro level, I agree with Kate. The new entrants are going to pose an enormous challenge moving forward, and I'm not sure what the path is on that. And along with that, I guess it kind of doubles onto it, is the role that aircraft noise is going to play within communities. Moving forward with new procedures or anything like that, it's become more and more of an issue. So how that plays out in the real world is going to have a real impact over the next 3 to 5 years. And then I think the challenges of the Northeast Corridor, I don't have the solution for you. You guys probably know more solutions than we could come up with, but I think those are sort of the high level 3 to 5 year looks.
And adding on to that, I couldn't say anything but yes to everything you two just said. But just a little twist on the new entrants. The reason these folks are showing up at our doorstep and really, hovering at our industry to get in is because of technology advances. And so our challenge really is not just to manage them, but to take advantage of those technology advances that are bringing those folks to our doorstep. Because those software advances, technology improvements, artificial intelligence, all those things can help us manage the air traffic system in a better way as well. So how can we take the system we are functioning in and make sure that we take advantage of those technical advances to improve the air traffic management system will be part of our challenge too.
For me, I think I'd focus on infrastructure investment, and not just in aviation or, for that matter, transportation. Communications, power. There's a whole array of areas where I think this country is lagging in its infrastructure investment, and I think that's going to come around. I think it's already biting us some. I think it's going to bite us a lot harder in the next couple of years. Some time ago, around 2008, 2009, Congress flipped a switch and investment became spending, and spending was bad. Investment was good, but spending was bad. And until we can figure out how to flip that switch again and get people to understand that you need this infrastructure investment for the economy to hum, I think we're in for a bumpy road.
Yeah, everything they said, it's going to be a busy 3 years. Like I said, change comes quicker than it ever will have in our history. I think we all see that in many different forms, as you guys mentioned. But I think the key is for the industry, not only the agency, but for airlines as well, is to, as we're looking at what we're going to do in the next 1, 2, 3 years within the current system, what's continuous improvement look like there, but also what's that 5 and 10-year vision look like? We got to be, it's so easy to get narrow on a problem you have today, especially in our world of budgets and constraints that we go through. But what does the 3-year plan look like? What does the 5-year plan look like? What does the 10-year plan look like? And how are we fitting the moves we're making today into what the long-term future of the NAS has to be? I think that's key.
So I would just add to all these really good answers is that, you know, we've got a funding problem, and we still have a funding problem, even though we've got an authorization. And so with all the things that are in the authorization language, reports, pilot programs, et cetera, and now we're dealing with new entrants, and yet we're still talking about the Northeast Corridor and 1090 congestion and how to get better weather on stars. So we've got a lot of things on our plate, and can we really do that with the money we're going to have available if the appropriators give it to us? And then, you know, one thing we've got to have to start talking more about is cyber. You know, cyber is going to be a very real issue, and I think that that's going to be something we'll have to address in the next near term, midterm, far term.
Okay, next question is dealing with the FAA reauthorization bill. So the FAA reauthorization bill contains many provisions with impacts to air traffic, next gen, airports, and R&D. What would each of you describe? Would each of you describe some of the provisions that are positive, and which provisions you were disappointed were not included?
Man, that's a loaded question. I guess I'll kick it off. From the airline perspective, you know, there's a lot of things in this FAA reauthorization that we neither wanted or think are necessary as far as new regulatory requirements. But I think the most important thing that they did is they made the policy decision to make it a 5-year bill, which is stable and consistent funding, and it provides the important thing of time to focus on these bigger issues than to fight about the squirrel over here and the squirrel over here. From the airline perspective, and Todd and I will disagree on this, but two of the most important things that weren't in the bill that were important to us were Congress took a policy that they weren't going to artificially increase airfares when there's a significant amount of revenue already being collected from taxpayers. They didn't increase the PFC, and they didn't increase the other 8 taxes that go into the trust fund. The other one is, and it's kind of apropos, today is actually the 40th anniversary of the Airline Deregulation Act. President Carter signed it 40 years ago today. There was provision in the Senate bill that would have taken us back to sort of the draconian era of where the government would be able to regulate the pricing of airline products. That provision ultimately came out, and that was sort of a tectonic shift that made things okay to go through. The other one, I guess I'd be remiss, I'd probably need a therapy couch to talk about it, but the Atc Reform Debate, I think Congress missed a pretty significant opportunity to set a platform for the future. If you look at how that debate evolved, it started out with everybody saying, at least every stakeholder that I can remember saying, the status quo is not working. This was one proposal that was put out there. We supported it. It didn't happen. Now we sort of have to go back internal and work through the status quo and try and make it work. So that's sort of our quick and dirty.
I guess if we're going down the road, I'm next. So I would just add to that, I was really fearful of the economic re-regulation conversations that were going on in the Hill, and also thankful that they didn't get in the bill. Some few small things did, seat size and the like. But we need to understand that aviation is part of a broader transportation network. And when somebody gets up in the morning and they have to get from point A to point B, they're just looking for a mode of transportation. They're not saying, I get to ride a train today, right? They're just trying to get from point A to point B. And if the Congress puts in more economic regulation on aviation and makes it more and more expensive and removes flexibility, we're seeing all these new entrants show up in all modes of transportation. Aviation will be displaced, will be put in a disadvantaged situation, and we need to make sure that when we make decisions in transportation or in aviation, we're thinking about the broader perspective, because these new entrants may eat the lunch out of, for instance, short-haul aviation. And if we are putting ourselves at risk by re-regulating economically in the airlines, I think we're in a dangerous spot. So I'm glad that not more was included in the reauthorization.
From an airport perspective, we were disappointed. Frankly, I had, just personally, editorial comment, I was rooting for them not to get a bill done until next year, because I thought the House was going to flip. And from the airport perspective, we had a much better audience with the Democrats in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. So I was disappointed. I know I'm supposed to say that we like stable, predictable funding. I would have been happy with a few more months of uncertainty to see what happens. I think Congress missed an opportunity on infrastructure investment, flat funding for the airport improvement program, no increase in the passenger facility charge, diminished buying power in both of those programs over the years, and we got to figure out a way to pay for that. So I'd say we were unhappy with the outcome.
I got to be careful I don't go to jail here or get my taxes audited. We as airlines obviously are for less regulation. With your help and the folks in the airline, not just Delta, all the way across the airlines, operations are running better than they ever have in the history of aviation. We cancel fewer flights, we run closer to on time. We run 20 points of A0 better than we did 10 years ago. All airlines do. To our customers who want to fly their flights and not be canceled and who want to fly on time, these are the good old days. The good old days weren't the good old days. We were terrible airlines in the past. We're good today. As a result of improvement, we as airlines need fewer regulations, less regulation, whether it's on the economic side, which has already been talked about, or even some of the things that you have to adhere to in an airplane that you don't have to adhere to in a train or a bus. We are so over-regulated and not in the customer's best interest. As an example, at 2 hours and 59 minutes, we got to start back to the gate, even though we could wait 12 more minutes and everybody on that airplane could get to their destination instead of going back and being canceled. We have the customers, and we've proven we have the customer's best interest at heart. And I think as a system, we've got to be allowed to operate until such a time where we prove that we need more regulation and not less. I can't speak for every airline as to that, but I think that it's getting a little bit burdensome, and we've got to be consistent across all modes of transportation and not necessarily just regulate airlines for whatever reason. It's kind of been historical, the way we've always done things in this country, but we need to take a wider view of that, in our opinion.
Thank you.
I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the fact that there was a 5-year bill and how significant that was. You all may have heard that the last time the Congress passed a 5-year authorization bill for the FAA was in 1982. I was talking to a fellow that works for Dan Elwell, special, actually for Carl, and he was saying he wasn't even, I think he was like in kindergarten the last time there was a 5-year authorization. So that's very important because it does set a predictable path on where the Appropriations Committee can go. Rachel and I were talking last night about the funding path for FAA, the ops account and facilities and equipment. And as Todd mentioned, the airport program was held flat, which I don't think was a great outcome. But in ops, there is about, over the 5-year period, there's about a 12.5% overall increase between think it's, what is the first year, 2019 to 2023 or 2018 to 2023. And then in the capital program, it's about 11%. And that's sort of a good tee off because I think you'll talk about what's not great about that.
Yeah, so in the facilities and equipment account, it's very, it's 2% every year, again, if the appropriators give it to us. But there are a lot of things on our plate from the standpoint of technology, and so looking at it from someone who builds technology and delivers it to these air traffic facilities on a regular basis, there are things, enhancements, capabilities, et cetera, that have got to be funded if we want to keep the NAS moving forward and if we want to continue kind of with the path next gen started. And I think there is cyber language, and I think that's very good in that bill. There's remote virtual tower language, there's unmanned aircraft language, but I think part of maybe a disappointment on our side is really, what do we do now that we've gotten this far with next gen? What's next? And we're going to have to make a lot of, continue to improve the system to just deal with what we have today. And then when you start talking about supersonic jets and unmanned aircraft and other things that are going to come along, how are we going to fund all those sorts of things?
Good, thank you. Switching gears here a little bit. I know this topic's been discussed in various ways in the last few days, but being faced with disruptive technologies such as Uber, Elevate, and SpaceX, how will the balance of safety and advancement be achieved?
I guess I don't really even see that there's going to be a balance. I think it's always going to lean towards safety. There's going to be some outward pressure to make things move faster, but the people that are the new entrants and want to develop this, they know if there's a catastrophe, the timing that adds to their timeline is going to be much worse than the inertia of just working through the issue and making sure things are safe. But that's, I guess, it's more of a personal opinion on it.
I think the thing that I would add, I work with one of the companies that's trying to get in, that is going to be a new entrant, Terrafugia, which is building a flying car, which is kind of crazy. And one of the things that's a message that they deliver that I think is very important and important for you all is that these new systems, they need to be integrated into the NAS. Originally when sort of the advent of the UAVs, there was discussions about, well, no, we're going to do a carve out and not have to deal with the FAA. And I think one of the things that they've learned as they are, in their sort of infancy is the fact that they really do need to be integrated into the airspace, and NACA's role is going to be really important with that. We were meeting with some of the folks from NACA last week, and one of the fellows I was with was talking about how Uber Elevate is estimating something like 10,000 aircraft a year and 1,000 takeoff and landings a day or something, and he said that's a takeoff and landing every 26 seconds. And the fellow from NACA that was in the room said, he goes, wow, he goes, that means every facility would be a level 12 facility. We'd all get a pay raise. So, it's gonna really change things for sure.
Yeah, I might add too, when you look at Uber Elevate, they're not trying to go to small communities. Their 3 designated kind of, institutional points are Los Angeles, Dallas, and Dubai. So when you think about trying to integrate an Uber Elevate into communities and airspace around large metropolitan areas, it's going to be really a challenge. But I kind of don't think safety is a thing. I think safety is something that we instill in all of our processes and all of our systems, and it really does have to be something that's really there and at the forefront all the time. I think, frankly, that thus far, I know for some of the commercial providers, it's frustrating that we're slow the way we are, but there's a reason we are the safest system in the world. And part of that is that we really don't sacrifice one for the other.
So if I could just add, so aviation isn't the only industry that's facing significant changes in technology and bringing new you know, features and challenges and risks to their businesses. I'd say the banking industry is seeing it in technology. I'd say the health industry is seeing it with incredible changes in, you know, biological changes and medical advances. And so the government always struggles when there's big changes coming fast at them. How do we regulate for safety to, you know, protect our citizens? And they typically turn to performance-based regulations. And what that basically means is it's on the burden of the new provider to prove that they have a safe system, safe piece of equipment, safe operator, safe environment. And I'll give you a quick example. What does that mean in reality? SpaceX and NASA, you know, SpaceX is going to be one of the two providers of bringing astronauts into the space for NASA. And what SpaceX wanted to do was do a fuel and go, where you would have the astronauts in the capsule on the rocket, and they would fuel while the astronauts were there, you know, already strapped in, ready to go, and then lift off. And NASA thought that was pretty risky and not the way they did things. And so, but they worked out a deal where if SpaceX can show 5 times that this is a safe approach, then we'll let you do it. So that's performance-based, you know, and I think that's what FAA is absolutely doing with the new entrants, be it this commercial space with the UASs. You know, that's what the whole IPP experiments FAA is doing with drones. You know, show us what you're doing. You know, prove it, give us the data. That's what's happening in autonomous vehicles. Drive around in small, you know, examples of on the streets, but with a live driver. Performance-based regulation. That's how we keep it safe.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. Integrated system is what we need, safety culture. You can't carve out a space in today's world and expect that we're going to have Uber over here and Lyft. It's not going to happen. It's got to be an integrated system that works together, that has same safety culture, regulated to the point it needs to be regulated, but by the same token, we got to make sure that we're allowing growth and allowing new things to come on and not overburden them with some of those regulations. So it's going to be a tough one the next 3 to 5 years. Absolutely.
So I want to go to the top question on Slido, because it's actually in our notes to ask later. To ask later. It's a very interesting question. And it has to do with using off-the-shelf equipment. Can we put that question up there? It was by Chris. Yeah, it's none of those. Dropped off. So the FAA has long taken a stance that new equipment, new technologies are basically developed within the FAA, right? And for lack of a better analogy, they don't allow plug and play technologies. Here we go, right there. How does developing completely custom hardware software solutions for problems impact the industry versus using commercial off-the-shelf products that are available worldwide now and adapting to our needs?
So, I mean, I guess as a system provider, I'll start here. I think that there are so many, you know, again, with technology moving as quickly as it is, and it's not just happening on the platform side, it's also happening on the types of capabilities, whether it's hardware or software capabilities around, and it does kind of drive the need to maybe be more flexible than we've been and more agile than we've been in the past. You know, some systems may have greater requirements, ERAM stars, ATOP large, automation systems that really work in some of the unique characteristics of the airspace and the FAA. But there are so many decision support tools and COTS products and things that could be easily integrated. And I use the word easily cautiously, but maybe less painfully than we've done in the past, where we have these big system acquisitions and we respond to, 70 pages of requirements that are defined, instead of really saying to us, what are the performance characteristics we're looking at? You bring us your best and brightest technology.
If I can add to that. Yeah, so we've got space-based ADS-B being presented by a non-government, sure, supported by entities that were created by governments, but essentially a privatized, entity bringing us space-based ADS-B. We haven't had that opportunity before to buy commercial off-the-shelf core FAA capabilities. And I think with the advances in telecommunications and other places, not to mention the privatization of ANSPs, so air traffic control providers around the world, this is going to put us in a position of not just buying commercial off the shelf, but buying something that's proven in other countries. I'd say remote towers are advancing faster in other countries than ours, and that maybe it'll be proven in another country and then adopted by us. So we need to be open. That's kind of that first challenge I was talking about. We need to be open to say, yeah, some things we need to have built at home, built by us. And other things, yeah, maybe we can take something commercial off the shelf, tweak it a bit if we need it, but minimize that, because the advantage of buying it from a worldwide ANSP base is that it will continue to modernize with our fixed costs and investments being worldwide, spread throughout the world, throughout all of ANSPs, not just our taxpayers, supporting technical advances. So I think it's very important to be able to realize that the future, I hope, is a combination of things built at home and commercial off the shelf.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can just circle back real quickly, and there is, I'm working on something right now, we are, where we are really looking at bringing kind of an available product into the FAA. But the dates that the agency has, and by the way, these are smart people at the agency. This is no disrespect intended to the people who are working this procurement. But we're talking about an IOC date for this relatively, by comparison to large automation systems, COTS kind of available capability, and the IOC date's 2023. And so the SpaceX guy yesterday's talking about taking people to Mars by 2024. Right. So there's a perfect example of ways we need to be more flexible and think a little differently, whether they could achieve that or not.
And I think what I would say that the heart of that question is about whether a system is custom designed or it's off the shelf. It's that FAA's procurement system has to work so that the investment decisions don't take so long, and so that it doesn't take till 2023 to get to IOC. So staying focused on the procurement process, which FAA has the different flexibility than any other agency in government, but can it work better? I think that's the heart of that question, and it can.
And I don't think we're good at this today. I think we're all headed down our roads of technology. Internal in the agency, elsewhere, not necessarily in the room talking to one another. So in my opinion, this should be a more systematic approach that puts the vendors and the agency and the airlines all together, so that we're developing common situational awareness and tools that works in everybody's shop to make the system better. And we're as guilty as anybody. We're going to go out and get a new flight planning system, but we haven't really talked to the FAA necessarily to make sure that the output of that is exactly what they want. And we need to do a better job of that too. So we got to take a system approach to this. From the airline side, we don't care who develops it, where it comes from, how it plugs in, as long as it gives us the most flexibility and obviously leverages safety to the highest degree.
And realize NAV Canada is out there not only providing air traffic services for Canada, but it's also selling their services to other ANSPs. And they're not the only ANSP, privatized ANSP, or whatever you want to call them, ANSP that's out there, trying to sell services to other air traffic control providers. It's gonna grow.
So, all right, we're going to go, because we've shortened this panel and there's a lot of questions coming in, I'm going to go again off script, and let's go to the top question up here. But I want to preface this question with, should ATC be privatized? Let's be very clear. We've never agreed with the word privatization. We never support privatization. It got labeled privatization. We're talking about a not-for-profit model, okay? I don't want to answer anything other than a not-for-profit model, because we wouldn't stand for it. So should there be some sort of not-for-profit model infrastructure similar to NAV Canada? Would that work in the States, and why or why not?
Yes, I absolutely think it was a missed opportunity in the authorization. There are restrictions, and I think we talk about it a little bit here. There's a lot of money coming in, but the way it's spent on the spending side, there are restrictions in government that are inhibiting progress. And there's going to be a lot of hard discussions that have to take place at the agency and within Congress on topics that they don't like to change, as far as like budget rules and who has jurisdiction over different things. But in reality, you know, we supported the corporatized version, and I think we would in the future, but it was a tough battle, and I don't think it's something we want to revisit anytime in the near future, to be honest with you.
Everybody's looking at me. I think one of the reasons why it didn't make it over the finish line is, you know, the general aviation community was very concerned and very active, and at the end of the day, very effective at holding enough folks in opposition to the chairman's proposal that it didn't make it over the finish line. I think the issues about airspace access were important to them. I think the governance of the corporation was something that was of concern to them. As a former appropriator, you know, my old committee was concerned about the oversight that the new organization may or may not have as a privatized entity, and what does that mean for facilities and consolidation of facilities and all the things that could potentially happen when the government is sort of no longer holding the purse strings and the policy. I think, you know, in response to sort of some of the concerns, and I heard Paul and Trish talk many times about the stable, predictable funding stream for the FAA, you know, providing the FAA the opportunity to spend their operations funding over a 2-year period versus a 1-year period goes a long way in helping when there's a continuing resolution or, God forbid, another instance of sequestration, which I predict won't happen on the FAA again. I just think I think the bottom line is big change is really, really hard to make, and institutional change as dramatic as this is tough to do.
Go ahead. So I guess I would say that a system where we have all of our aviation users paying taxes and having those taxes deposited in the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, and then having to beg, you know, scrape, borrow, try to convince Congress to give us any of that money back is not an ideal system, if not broken system. So sort of the flip side of should it be corporatized or independent or whatever we want to say, the system today isn't working. So is a non-government system for air traffic control services, ANSPs, working elsewhere in this world? Yeah. Could we make it work? Yeah. Is it a huge, potentially risky transition? Yeah. But companies do corporate mergers, acquisitions, changes. I mean, and there's billions of dollars at stake when these companies go in and out. There are, change management and procedures and processes and people who do this for a living that could help us get from where we are today to whatever new entity we think is best. And, you know, I think that we might be wise to consider it again. I was there for the first round with the Clinton administration. I was there for this round. Hopefully I'll be there for the third round.
Yeah, a few years ago when we looked hard at it from the airline side and did a lot of visits to Canada and a few other places that have privatized systems, Delta was one of the few airlines that came out and said, no, we weren't for it. And it really had nothing to do with a lot of what we talked about on the funding side and other things that may be easier in a not-for-profit situation. But it really came down to, did they provide a plan to make the system more efficient? And the answer to us was no at that time. If somebody would approach us, regardless of what model it is, and says we can make it as safe, if not safer, and more efficient, we're willing to listen to that. So we were kind of on the fence on that. Right now, we're probably neutral on our stance on that if it ever comes up again. But we're open to, we really, our thoughts go with our customers, your customers, and what's the best system for that. And if we keep the customers in mind, we'll make the right choices.
I'd just add, we're probably neutral as well. But I was reflecting back on the first comment I made, which was about courageous leadership. And I think NATCA exhibited courageous leadership by acknowledging that the system is not as good as it could be, doing a great job of painting the picture of what the problem was and being willing to be in the middle of a tough, hard-fought, gnarly public policy debate when it would have been easier maybe to stand aside and let other people do that. But that's the kind of leadership your organization has in Washington, and it's the reason you have the influence you do.
I think everyone could say that it got closer this year than any other time because of your support for it.
Mm-hmm.
No, I can honestly say the airlines would not have supported, and we followed. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for all your answers there. I don't think we have an agreement even on our own panel on this, but the question is, the pilot shortage is one of the issues being discussed both in the U.S. and across the world. The impact is obviously being felt by travelers, airports, labor unions, and others in the industry. Has your company or organization been active in discussing the issue and offering potential solutions?
From the A4A, or go ahead.
I was just going to say from our side, gosh, it's been on our minds for 10 years. We know our attrition rates, we know what's out there, we know the difficulties we have in training young pilots now. So we got a plan in place to account for that on our mainline side, that we're not worried. We're in a very fortunate position that we're kind of the airline that people want to gravitate towards right now, but we got to be careful with that and make sure that we still are that choice for the young pilots of today, the newer pilots of today. There is a concern I have, around the entire industry and what does that model look like. It's hugely expensive to go get your time now in the cockpit and become ready for airline type pilots. So I think there may be a different business model we have to look at from an airline side of what we have to fund or help fund or pay back once we get people on board with our company. And I think England and a few of the other countries are already starting to think through, some of the airlines in those countries trying to think through how they better sponsor that.
Yeah, we also have similar concerns. We're trying to look to the future. It's been more that there are regulatory options that have been reviewed, but the main thing is, so you go to college and you can pay back a student loan, but once you leave and you need these hours to train, there's a kind of a financial disincentive to go forward. So we've been trying to work either within the existing federal programs like Pell Grants or anything like that, or the creation of sort of new programs to help young people that are going up that want to have it, because these are great careers. I mean, these are well-paid careers, but it's trying to get more people in the pipeline. It's a challenge because anytime you expand or create something, it costs more money, and it's tough to do that at a federal level. But we'll continue to work on it.
I guess I'd add that I think we're looking at shortages not only in pilots, but we want the best and brightest engineers and systems engineers and software developers and network experts that we can get. And so there's a real need for us to continue to cultivate and make this business something that's attractive to people to want to enter. And, we have wonderful people who come up with great innovative solutions, but we are always looking for whether we're going to have a downturn in that kind of, the people who are going to kind of bring us these brand new ideas that we can take forward and kind of function more in a little bit more of a kind of commercial environment.
And I would just add, I think it is, as Rachel said, it's when we talk about investing in infrastructure, we really need to invest in human infrastructure. And I think the workforce development challenges at the FAA, whether it's NATCA or PASS, pilots, you name it. I mean, it's something that I think is going to be an issue that's at the forefront in the years to come.
I always have something to say about something, so if I could just add one thing. So the DOT manages the EAS, the Essential Air Service Program, and they're seeing very small airlines go out of business because of the pilot shortage. And this is that thing, like I said, transportation's like water. People are going to get from point A to point B one way or another. So if we have small airlines going under because of the pilot shortage, people are going to go to other modes of transportation. There will be a safety impact. As we know, aviation is one of the safest industry. So when we regulate and we decide regulations for our pilots, we really ought to stress that you ought to look at the unintended consequences, which is what Gordon talked about yesterday, right? Of making one decision in one place. And we so often in transportation look at aviation only and not at transportation across the board. And I think the pilot shortage and the regulations, we need to broaden it, because if we have services that can't be provided because of the pilot shortage, people go on other modes of transportation, and there'll be a safety impact.
Mm-hmm. Okay, under the Trump administration, there's a lot of talk about reducing the size of government. What are each of your views on the impact any potential reduction would have on the FAA?
I'll start. I think there's a saying that in Congress that the president proposes and Congress disposes. And if you look at President Bush's budgets, President Obama's budgets, and President Trump's budgets, usually at the end of the day, the final enacted budget doesn't look anything like what the president proposes. So my guess is efforts to reduce the size of government, particularly if there is a change in the majorities in the Congress, and probably even if it isn't changed, is going to be a difficult thing to achieve, particularly as it comes to the FAA, because I think the FAA is considered a real core mission of the government, and I think you'll note that there's been, even in the worst of times and the worst of budgets, FAA has usually done pretty well. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would completely agree, because just within the federal government, the FAA is sort of a unique budget structure in the first place. But it's going to kind of blow your mind. The commercial taxes that are going into the trust fund, they rose 4.6% in fiscal year 2018 to about a level of $15.5 billion. 15.5 is about the number that the total FAA budget is. So in a couple years, there's going to be more money collected in taxes from commercial users than the entire FAA budget. So as I mentioned earlier, the revenue side is great. It's the constraints on the spending side that we have the problem. So I think it's something we would all work together. We'd like more money to go to F&E, and we'd like more money to go to AIP. How do we spend down the money that's already sitting there and that's going to be collected in the future will be the challenge.
I mean, I have a suggestion on that. I think, in the highway program, one of the tools that they use is contract authority, which is, in budget geekery, it's a mandatory form of budget spending that you can count on over a period of time. And if you converted the F&E program to contract authority, there would be that certainty at least on the capital side. You make those investments. Now, the one challenge I would make and everyone, the balances in the trust fund right now are fantastic, because the airline industry is doing really well. People are flying, and so the receipts, the excise tax is a percentage on the cost of the ticket. If the economy tanks, like it did after 9/11, or if people don't fly like they did after 9/11, or in 2008, then the receipts go down dramatically. And one of the nice things about and don't shoot me as an appropriator, about having sort of general fund and trust fund resources for the FAA's budget is if for example, the trust fund is not collecting $15 billion in a given year, and it's 8, the fact that there's an authorization to provide resources from the general fund is the safety net to keep the FAA whole.
Oh, and I 100% agree. There should continue to be a robust general fund contribution made. There's $6 billion of unobligated money that sits in the trust fund, and it's going to continue to grow year after year, and there's no reason that you have to have that large of a reserve fund, especially when you're collecting more taxes than the entire budget for an agency with the general fund contribution.
We're going to do point counterpoint. In the highway program, there was a year where the balances were really high, and they decided they were going to spend them down. If you look at the highway trust fund, it's basically insolvent.
Yeah, it's bankrupt.
I think we have to be careful about how much we spend them down.
I'm not
Let me make
down to the penny.
2 points if I can. One, operations account of the FAA, which pays all your salaries, is going to be just fine. As folks indicated, the facilities and equipment account, the research, engineering, development, the AIP programs. Those are the ones, if anybody is successful, big if anybody is successful in pushing down spending, that's where that'll happen. It won't happen in the ops account. 2, administration budgets are not worth the paper they're written on. I wouldn't lose a moment of sleep over a proposed 5% cut. It won't happen.
So we're starting to come to the end. Let's talk about a plan. Is there a plan? We've touched on this entire week, emerging technologies, UAS, commercial space, how quick this change is coming. You throw in that in next-gen modernization projects. You have en route datacom, terminal flight data management, EIDS, BOR-MON. A lot of pressure on the NAS. We're asking these facilities to do this when we're at a 28 to 30-year low in staffing. So how is this plan developed, and how do we deal with the staffing issue we have in the facilities?
So I guess from the standpoint of modernization, in instituting new technologies, we certainly recognize the challenge that it is for the workforce, because it's disruptive to go into a facility. Even if you do it the best way that you can, the workforce has to be trained. There are transition plans that take time. There are a lot of pressures on outside events. And so this coordination is very tightly connected in how you go in and be sure that you can make, institutional changes in an air traffic piece of the system without disrupting the workforce. And when you add a situation of the staffing levels like they are now, we very much rely on the early user involvement at the beginning of programs. So we need NACA representatives, because we can build the best system in the world, but if the users don't think it's great, what are we going to do? So it's really important to us to have, the users all the way through the process. And with the staffing levels like they are, we recognize it makes a very big difference when you're looking at what key sites you go to, or even what kinds of technology you deliver.
I'll go. There's this dead silence. I'll say something. I do not have a plan. I don't know if there is a plan. I would say, however, that over the span of history, we have always managed to figure it out. The pace of technological change that we're dealing with today is astonishing. But the challenge will be for all of us just to stay up with it as much as possible and to meet those challenges. Too many resources, too few resources chasing too many problems. It's going to take the human element for us to just do the best we can on that. And
I think this is where the 5-year authorization will come in handy, where people are not going to be chasing down wormholes. There is some time to focus on the big problems. I think there's a goal, but I don't necessarily think there's a plan to execute it yet.
I think we probably should look a little bit deeper into the research on that, because a lot of it's going on right now on human factors, sort of human machine interface, and what they're finding. I mean, Silicon Valley is all over this about, how are people and machines interacting? What is the best way to make that happen? We have a tech center that does it, and yet, no. You can criticize it if I got it wrong, but we basically take a few controllers to sit in front of a screen at Raytheon or whatever, and what do you think? How do you think this is going? Obviously it's more sophisticated than that, but I think we need to pull in a lot of outsiders. We kind of have historically used our own people on human factors, and yet now there's this incredible community out there. I think we need to look outside our traditional walls on human factors and understand how to better, to present better equipment that through research, it clearly is going to be faster to be adoptable, quicker to learn, and not just, a couple folks giving feedback.
Yeah, it's maybe the biggest question that we've got in front of us as an industry. I mean, it was a great question. I'm spoiled. It's a little bit easier in a private company to go throw out technology and go through the change management thing. So I fully understand the behemoth that it takes to turn things towards a different technology and a newer technology. The only thing I would add from the industry side is you got to make sure that the industry is, the frontline employees involved, not only in testing, but in developing it. And if you get that frontline buy-in and that passion for something new and better, it's pretty easy in the change management field. But if it's something that's thrown upon the front lines with not a lot of input going into it, there's going to be obviously a little bit of rejection of that and some hard times to get that thing into your system and into your day-to-day processes. So that's the only thing I would offer is just make sure the front lines, the people that are really running the system out there, make sure they're involved in the development of those tools, and that'll help everything a little bit.
So with that, our time has come to an end. I know people have bio needs at this point of the day, so please give this panel a round of applause for their time and their effort. Thank you guys for your attention. Appreciate it very much.